Hey, it's Drybear. Dot 3 for Path of Exile 2 has been out for almost a week now. We're coming up on the 1 week anniversary, I guess. But there's been a crazy amount of changes that has gone into the release of the new Rise of the Abyssal League in Path of Exile 2. And along with that, when you change so much in the game, undoubtedly there's going to be things that miss the mark, don't function properly, or need to be adjusted. So Path of Exile 2, GGG, the developers, have put out a post going over what they intend to fix in the short term. They're already working on a .B or a B level patch that they're going to be releasing soon, fixing some of the problems that the game has right now. So today we're going to dive into exactly what they're looking at. So with the launch of Path of Exile 238 over the weekend, we've been keeping a close eye on feedback and issues that have been arising along with the Abyssal. They've already released 13 hotfixes. Most of them were bug fixes and general other issues, just kind of like performance problems they've been addressing. Nothing like major gameplay in that standpoint. And since launch, we are currently working on the 0.3.0b patch, which will fix a lot of outstanding issues, including the Warbringer's Totem Ascendancy notable. So there's a Warbringer Totem Ascendancy that just doesn't work right now, and they'll be fixing that as well. And they were expect to release it by the end of the week, with, today being Wednesday. That means over the next couple days, we'll be seeing this patch go live. Now, the first thing to talk about is going to be the League mechanic Rise of the Abyssal. I think this has a very wide range of issues that need to be addressed. They've done some really cool updates from the Abyssal League in Path of Exile 1 and when they brought it to Path of Exile 2. I think visually it looks really cool. I love the way the aesthetic's set up, the holes in the ground and the way they stitch together like a wound. The enemies and the visuals all come together really nice. However, there are some issues with it in general. I think that the mobs scale a little bit too quickly during the campaign, leading to some players dying very easily to Abyssal mobs. And I think there's also, because the mobs are so insanely scaled, in some cases it may be more beneficial just to completely skip it entirely. At least until you get to endgame anyway, where you can have a better chance of killing them more consistently, unless you're a veteran player or a high-level intermediate player where you have a solid build and you're able to kill them off in general, because there are some pretty strong Abyssal mobs. So what are they changing? The first thing is they're going to make it so Abyssal monsters can now be bound as specters, so a big win for Necros in general. Being able to bind those as specters is going to be pretty sweet. Also, the Vessel of Kulamak, and I'm kind of like debating whether I want to show this on screen or not. I've had some people say that they still want to kind of keep their, Rise of the Abyssal virginity and they don't want to see anything. So I'm just going to show general basic gameplay here rather than the bosses. If you want to know, the Vessel of Kulamak is the Abyssal boss for the League setup, and there are some issues with his encounter and all of that. So what they're doing for him specifically is Teleport Slam can no longer be avoided, and the damage it deals has been reduced. So rather than just kind of ignoring it entirely, they're making it so that it just teleports and slams on top of you. However, the damage that you take is going to minimize, so it's going to be more about mitigation. They also improved the telegraphing for his arena-wide cleave. The cleave has also been made easier to dodge in the final part of the fight, so just trying to balance out that encounter in general. Also, the area is overrun by the Abyssal map modifier, now spreads pits over a larger amount of the area. Now, again, I'm trying to be careful with this, but if you're ever seeing clips online or if you experience overrun by the Abyssal, it is absolutely ridiculous. Like, the amount of mobs that end up on your screen is insane. Some players can't even move. It's been crashing machines, causing performance issues. Like, it literally is a mob of monsters flooding your entire screen all over the place, which is pretty intense. So what they're changing with this one is they're spreading the pits over a larger area, which should help reduce the intensity. I think it's really cool to see that level of mobs in one area for the Abyssal, but it kind of breaks down some builds where they can't move, they get body blocked, and also just performance-wise, people start lagging and freezing and locking up, which means you're going to die anyway, which just isn't good for business. So they're spreading out the amount of Abyssals over the large area of the map to make sure the density and concentration isn't so overwhelming that you're literally unable to move, or if you have a machine that doesn't play nice with that, you'll be unable to play in general. The Strider of the Pits Spear Slam now has a global cooldown. This is super nice, and I actually think that they should do this on more enemies. There are some enemies that spam their abilities a little too hard, so having like an eternal cooldown or a global cooldown is going to help a lot. And now they stop tracking you with their storm when you are far enough away. They also reduced the damage of the crystal wall used by the Abyssal Stranglers. I think this is super nice just because it does hit really freaking hard, and in some cases cases, it can be pretty hard to spot. That's probably one of my gripes with the Abyssal League right now, is because you get so much stuff on screen, it can be hard to tell when those floating crystals are there, or when there's pits on the ground, or, you know, normal affixes or abilities from the mobs that got turned into abyssals. Sometimes it can be hard to actually see what's going on and avoid the things that are on the ground. They also reduced the movement speed of the shepherd of the pit and reduced the damage dealt by their ground effect. I think this absolutely needed to happen. This is a great change that I'm in favor of. Improve the invulnerability visual effect for the Lightless Moray. I think for the Lightless Moray, so without, I'm trying not to show too much here, but the Lightless Moray is basically a rehash of the mob from Act 2, the snake woman that goes into the ground and then disappears and then jumps out of the ground on top of you and does that swirl spin effect. However, the problem is the Lightless Moray, the abyssal version of it, is invulnerable until that animation is done, and also has other invulnerabilities to it as well as some of the rares and abyssal monsters in the Abyss League having long extended invulnerabilities that I think are not telegraphed well and not explained well. Some of like the octopus monsters, like the elites that you'll face, they have invulnerability until they finish a certain attack, and this has caused tons of problems. Comment below if this has happened to you. Those specific monsters, they have this specific attack that they do, and if they don't get to finish the attack, they will remain invulnerable until they get to finish the attack. However, if they start doing the attack and you walk away and you're kiting the mob and running away, it can be extremely awkward because until they finish that attack, they're invulnerable. You're hitting them, nothing's happening, no damage, until eventually you let them finish the attack. And in some cases where they are in the map, if they're in a tight corridor, they may not be able to finish that attack, which leaves them invulnerable for longer. I think it's a huge problem. Long extended invulnerabilities are super awkward in games like this, so I'd like to see them do more. However, making it more obvious is a step in the right direction. So what they're doing is they're making the invulnerable visual effect for the Lightless Moray, the ones that burrow and pop out, a lot more obvious, and the ignite chance and damage from its shade form explosion has also been reduced. I think this is great, but again, I would like to see them play around with more intelligent invulnerability. Some of the invulnerability for the Abyss mobs, at least in my opinion, feels awkward or randomly placed. In some cases, it seems like they shouldn't be invulnerable, but they are, and it's just not very clear as to what's going on with these. Also, there's a lot of issues with some of the affixes in Abyssal having fun thematic names that don't explain exactly what's happening. Next, I think is going to be a great change for new players. They're making it so the Abyssal monsters now introduce some of their skills slowly over time. So over the first 3 acts, instead of being able to use all of their skills from Act 1, there are definitely a lot of issues where a new player comes in, they exit Clearfell, they go into the first zone, they reach their first abyss, and then they get obliterated by an abyss monster and they have no idea what's going on. And I think this should probably be the main goal going forward, is to slowly introduce that stuff over time. Yes, if you're doing a repeat level, you're doing the campaign again for the 20th time, you don't notice or care. But if you're a brand new player and this is your first or second time through the campaign, especially if you're coming back for the Abyssal League, I don't think getting obliterated by an abyss mob right as you leave Clearfell is a good look for people that are just coming into the game for the first time. They've also removed the motion blur effect played when abyssal pits are closed. I think they need to be very careful about this. Chromatic aberration and motion blur built into particle effect systems is a very cool effect. And this is something that I think other games that are sci-fi or hyper-realistic need to learn better about. This happens in like the first aesthetic, for example. But when you add motion blur or chromatic aberration or distortion or refraction to particle systems, when those particle systems play, it can alter the way the game looks and make you miss abilities, right? So if the motion blur pops up with the closing of the pit, you may not be able to see that a projectile is coming towards you, may not be able to see that there's a ground effect on the ground, you may not be able to see that there's an after-death explosion or a volatility crystal or something like that. So when they distort your vision to make it look cool, I think that there's a very big gameplay sacrifice in that, so I'm glad they're easing up on this one by itself. Next, for outside of the league mechanics in general, one-time rare monsters found in the campaign no longer have their fixed hidden modifiers when used as tamed beast or specters. Kind of a lame, but it makes sense why they're doing this. You will no longer remain locked onto enemies while sprinting. So I think there's some things they can do to make sprinting better, colliding with walls or sliding off of walls, and also just how it changes direction in some cases. But the issue they're describing here is because you would auto lock on, especially with controller, when you use a skill to cancel your sprint or change the direction of your sprint, you can get into really awkward situations where you run, say you run west, and then you use an ability to cancel sprint, but it auto-locks that ability on an enemy that's behind you, which makes you awkwardly turn around, and in some cases can get you flipped around. So while it is nice to have the auto target on, just turning it off just to make sprinting feel better. Obviously, since sprint is meant to be an out-of-combat effect, something that you do when you're not in combat or intending to kill something, unless you're really, really trying to feather that and get it just right, they're removing the auto-lock on so that you don't make some weird U-turns when you're exiting sprint. Next, there's some things with the Well of Souls, the place where you jump into the pit and unveil your modifiers and use the veil in general. It's like it's the headquarters for the Abyssal League in general. However, it is a new zone that they added to the game and doesn't have all of the gold standard pass effects that it needs to, so they're getting caught up on some of those. So you can now use the control click on PC to start a new instance of the Well of Souls if you'd like to, and you could also do it on the button to jump into the Well of Souls. You can also now use /hideout and similar teleportation commands while you're in the Well of Souls, so just a little bit of a cleanup kind of, like just bookkeeping kind of thing. Next, they'll be changing maps without a map boss. No longer spawn a boss arena with only a rare monster pack inside of it. So if you haven't done mapping yet, mapping is just a end game, in infinite version of the current game, and the maps that have map bosses in a specific arena at the end of the map. But if the map is, it's the same map, but it doesn't have a map boss spawned on it, it will spawn a rare mob inside of it, so no longer spawns that there. They're also making it so vendor windows will now remember any search text you've entered on a per NPC basis until you close the game or exit back to main menu in general. A couple tricks for this: I like to type rare, like the word rare, when I'm looking at some vendors, because you can actually find, like I've found items on vendors that, I bought for 5,000 gold and then sold for 15 exalted or something, right? So if you know what you're looking for and you're like scanning items in a vendor, it can be very useful to buy things and use things. In some cases, you can type rare, you can type a specific modifier. If you're trying to buy a flask while you're leveling up, you can type charges per second or something like that, and it'll allow you to filter it. And now it'll have it so that after the patch, you'll be able to keep that search as part of your default in until you close the game down and then start it back up again. Boss fights with 2 bosses now correctly reset. This is like something, if you play the Interlude Acts, they've done this quite a lot. There's like several, like, hey, you fought these 2 bosses before, now fight them both at the same time. It's like the Miyazaki special, the dual boss fight in general. So like, FromSoft, they're definitely trying to lean into that FromSoft Souls-like category with this, but they're making it so there was an issue where if you respawned after failing a dual boss fight, one of the bosses wouldn't reset their HP or wouldn't reset entirely. There's still also bugs where their AI can get glitched, which I think is kind of lame. It makes the boss fight a lot easier. Like, I've had certain ones where the boss just goes AFK in the middle of the fight, like where will you be when diarrhea strikes kind of thing. So he just runs away, but at least they're fixing it so it can reset properly. The next one is a big one, and I think that they need to get a lot better about naming and describing new affixes that they add to the game. One of the gripes that I had when I first started Rise of the Abyssal was a lot of the new affixes for the Abyssal mobs were just flavor text. Like it meant nothing. You don't know what it's doing. You don't know what the effects are. It's super weird. And Soul Siphoner is one of those. So the way it works with the Abyssal ones is you can have rares with affixes on them. When you kill the rares on top of an abyss, they get absorbed by the abyss, and the monster that comes out can have either that affix or an elevated abyssal version of that affix. So with the mana siphoning aura, like the mana drain aura, that can be elevated into Soul Siphoner, which, I don't know, like you get your soul siphoned. What does that actually mean, Kobe Bryant? It doesn't really make any sense unless you actually look it up and see what the affix is actually doing. So what was that actual affix doing, which I'm not going to show on screen, but it is, normally it's like this aura like around your character, like the mana drain aura is like, about this big. It's like, about this big. The Soul Siphoner affix is the Abyssal version, and it's like twice as large and has 2 separate rings on it. It covers a good portion of the screen. It's quite big, and I feel bad for Melee that have to try and push through the Soul Siphoner effects. So what did this Soul Siphoner affix do before, and what it does right now before the patch is both rings of the Soul Siphoner affix prevent mana recovery entirely and also drain mana at the same time. So you can't recover mana, and your mana is quickly draining when you're in this massive green circle. Additionally, you're also taking lightning damage over time while you're standing in it. Again, super awkward for Melee, super awkward for slow-moving characters that have to deal with that, especially with some of the mobs that are Melee, like the ones that have the spears in the Abyssal, that it will chase you down pretty hard. All of that's super awkward. So they're changing it now, so the inner ring now reduces damage dealt. again, pretty rough for melee. So if you're in the inner ring at all, you will do less damage from that. The outer ring reduces skill speed for each time you use a skill while standing in it, and both rings deal physical damage over time, so it's a little bit easier to mitigate this for most classes. Forge Hammer, the new ability for maces / warriors, which has been getting raving reviews. If you haven't tried Forge Hammer, you should. It's super awesome. It no longer costs mana when you recall it. It was kind of an oversight. It's kind of weird for you to have to pay the mana cost twice for an ability that you throw and retrieve, so it no longer will do that with the patch, and other skills such as War Cries cannot empower that use on the return. Deidre's Dark Design from the Deidre's Undoing support now deals spell damage instead of secondary damage. Added a missing duration and ground effect types to the His Foul Emergence skill to allow it to function with relevant support gems. Temporarily disabled the following rogue exiles: Tuawa the Ruthless, Ulfred the Afflicted, Drusian the Artillerist, and Doran the Deft. I think Tuawa needed to be turned off. If this is the one I'm thinking, she's really freaking annoying, kind of intense. There might have been some other issues with these. She was kind of like the only one that I felt like I was just really dragging my feet against. The rest of them are there. Now, there's probably some other issues with these, either just being too problematic or otherwise having performance issues in general, but these 4 have been disabled in the upcoming patch. The Derelict Mansion Map Boss Arena no longer requires finding a tome to open. The Boss Arena and Derelict Mansion Map will now be open if you die to the bosses after opening it once. I've never had this happen, but I've heard of people getting stuck from this. That's kind of a nice cleanup there. The Raised Fields map no longer stops you from entering the boss arena after it has been started. A nice change as well. The barrier outside the church in Erastus can no longer be broken early. Without spoiling it, you get locked in a building, and there's a lore reason for it, and there were some issues where you could brick your dialogue or soft lock your game. There's other soft locks as well, like the Act 4 final boss. I got soft locked because when I got knocked down onto the floor during a phase transition, I was unable to get up and the boss didn't proceed, so I was just face planted into the ground, looking for quarters, and just had to restart my game because it was broken, which is really unfortunate. So hopefully they keep working on that in general. Improve the telegraphing of Yama the White's Future Sight skill. Increase the cooldown of some of Torvian's Hand of the Savior's skills. The projectile speed of their bouncing axe skill has been reduced, and the amount of freeze buildup from Torvian causes when under the effects of the Twilight's Order sword buff has been reduced as well. I really like the Torvian fight. I thought it was super cool, but it is also really spammy and really intense, and I can imagine it being very hard for a lot of builds as well, so I'm glad they're kind of adjusting it. I think there's other fights that need this as well, like the second interlude act final boss. Some of them are just really spammy and super intense, so having some of these projectile speeds come down and increase cooldowns I think is going to be necessary for a lot of the bosses that they've added that are just really like they drank like 18 Red Bulls before they started the fight kind of thing. Scourge of the Skies Birdstorm can no longer be avoided. The slam combo used by Kurtog Lord of Kin can no longer be avoided. Some of the skills used by the Great One can no longer be avoided. Asmodi, the Faradun Princes, one of the interlude act bosses, homie, like, talk about drinking too many Red Bulls before a fight. That guy is on something. Like, he just teleports and goes all over the place constantly. So what they're doing is the triple lacerate skill, they're making the tracking a little bit more lenient. It was hard for some characters. Even with a dodge roll, you would still get hit by it, and it does a lot of damage. So I think from this perspective, they're just trying to make it a little bit more fair. I also think, I know they're trying to do the whole Souls-like thing with this. They're trying to create a Souls-like experience, but I do feel like some of the bosses, especially Act 4 and the new interludes, I feel like they don't have as many opportunities to fight back, and especially for melee characters that have to get in melee range, especially slow animation or long cast like Smith of Kitava, or Sunder, or Snipe, or two-handed staff casters that have slow cast times. Some of these bosses are incredibly hard to hit because they never stand still, they're always teleporting, and they have tons of invulnerability phases where they go underground, or they fly up into the air, or they get out of the arena, or they become ethereal, and it's like, some boss fights are just really hard to get an opportunity to fight back in any way for a good 30 to 40% of the builds in the game that aren't playing super high cast speed times. You can now use portals after defeating Siora, Blade of the Mist. Thank God. Oswin, the Dread Warden, now removes all the debuffs he has applied to the player when he is killed. There is a animation and dialogue sequence at the end once you do that. I've also had, and comment below if this has happened to you, but I've had several boss fights, including Oswin, where you get stuck in dialogue and you die during the dialogue. And even though it says boss completed on screen, when you respawn, you have to do it again. I've had this happen on many bosses. So at least they're being aware of it. Reduce the likelihood of treant foul spawns firing projectiles while walking. This is a nice change because boy, do those projectiles hurt real bad. And so when they do go off, it's kind of a huge pain in the butt. So I'm glad they're paying attention to that as well. Reduce the damage of the Quill Crab's Quill projectiles. This was just outright killing people. They were starting the game and going up against the Quill Crabs, especially if they get rare or they get infused by a spirit or something. They can start hitting really, really insanely hard. Update the description of life tap support. To clarify, it turns a supported skill's mana cost into life cost rather than stating a portion of, so it's clearer. Tabna's pillar world map icon to correctly describe the benefits it provides. This is huge. It was just giving random stats before that weren't accurate to what it was actually providing. Updated the Navili's rest world map icon to indicate it provides permanent benefit. Didn't show that before. A lot of people skipped it and didn't know it was there. Corrected and simplified Meditate's description. This is purely a description change. A lot of people didn't understand what Meditate was doing even before they changed it for this patch. Clarified the skill description for Infernal Cry to indicate that it only empowers melee attacks. And Thunderous Leap's description no longer inaccurately mentions that it only detonates spear skills. As with any detonator skill, it detonates anything that is capable of being detonated. It has the detonator moniker on it, and so anything that can be detonated will be detonated. And lastly, let's dive through the bug fixes. I'm just going to highlight the important one here because there's a bunch of bug fixes. The first one is that if you've been waiting for the answered call notable on your Warbringer, it will be activated in the next couple days, so you can finally use it and actually have that as part of your build. This next one's a big one. Fixed a bug where you were unable to dodge roll past enemies when you were partially surrounded. There's been plenty of times, at least for me, especially on the new Abyssals, when they open up and floods of monsters come out, you would get body blocked and would be unable to roll, which in most cases, depending on your build, would result in a death, so getting that fixed is nice. Another big one that mercenaries will know about is fixed a bug where reloading could fail on crossbows, most notably when weapon swapping. So with this patch, they made it so weapon swapping is instantaneous. As soon as you press the button, you instantly swap, which has been really cool if you're running multiple weapons with different bonuses. Super awesome and very fun. However, there's an issue with the crossbows where you'll try to reload and it will fail, which is really awkward. So that was confirmed a bug and will be fixed in the next patch. Another big one for blood mages and stormweavers specifically, anyone that uses Ember Fusillade. I mean, obviously anyone can use it, but that's kind of where a lot of it's going right now. There was a bug where if you ran wild shards on Ember Fusillade, which is a 20 to 25% chance to proc additional projectiles, it was actually making it so you could, if you recasted Ember Fusillade, which especially for the blood mage variant of this build, you would be spamming Ember Fusillade a lot. It would cause it to not, it would cause it to have unintended effects with the way wild shards procs with it. So now they fixed it so that where Ember Fusillade, when supported by wild shards, should work as intended. Another nice one is if you're running with shield wall or shield build for the warrior, resonating shield, shield wall, and fortifying cry were not actually scaling with area damage modifiers properly. And so with this being fixed in the next patch, this should hopefully help the shield based builds, the warrior builds and specifically, to scale a little bit better if you had any area damage in your build. A hilarious bug, but I guess frustrating depending on your interest at that point. But the Act 4 boss has a ton of issues. He also, I hope that they do this sparingly, but the Act 4 boss has 3 phases with long dialogue and long transition animations in between, which if you don't die is kind of cool and thematic and cinema kino, but I feel like for a fight that you're gonna end up doing a lot of times, I think it's a bit much. So there were issues, like I said, I got one where I face planted into the dirt during the Act 4 boss and I had to just respawn at checkpoint because my character wouldn't stand back up and the boss wouldn't actually run to the next area to transition. There's been issues where it would, he would knock you down from phase 1 to phase 2 and then run to the second area and then spawn a second version of himself and run to the second area. And there were people that were fighting 2 of him at one time, which is ridiculous. So they fixed the bug where he could spawn duplicate versions. I don't see anything here about my faceplant issue. So hopefully that one gets fixed as well. Or maybe it's just a very niche edge case that I ran to on my own. A relatively small one, but one that I think is worth mentioning is the uncut gems in your gem stash tab were being sorted by their name and not their actual number. Like they're actually like phonetic name order, which means that they were all over the place, right? 13 would appear before 4 and stuff like it. It got super weird. So they say that they fixed in this patch. Hopefully they go back to sorting by their tier, like the actual level of the uncut gem, not their actual text name. Fix an issue where the Amanamu's Void debuff was missing a description. So obviously you saw this weird thematic affix that you didn't understand what it did because it just had a name, and then it would debuff you, and then the debuff had no description as well, so you were just left guessing as to what you were facing in the Abyss mobs. Fixed an issue where some players would not have a selected hideout after logging into a different platform. This caused all kinds of issues, specifically with trade. Sometimes you would be unable to travel to another person's hideout and do things like that. Like some of it just got really awkward. So especially with the merchant tab, having to travel to people's hideouts, getting this fixed in is great. And they've also put in a ton of fixes for crashes, desyncs, hitches, soft locks, and other things like that, as you would expect. So 2 client crashes, 2 instant crashes, a whole bunch of other client crashes and desyncs related to abilities or certain interactions or going certain places in game. So you have all that in there as well. So a very meaty patch overall, coming a week after the launch with some nice nerfs and some nice changes and bug fixes as well. Let me know what you think about the patch, what you were hoping for in this patch, and what you still think needs to be addressed in the next patch. There's 0.3.0 C, D, E, all of those. So let me know where your head is at on these ones and how you're enjoying the Rise of the Abyss League down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.